Okay, so now that we have all the outline work done, well, actually, I should say the preliminary, the border work outline done. I still have to do the detail work on the inside of the wings. But now the majority of that's done, I'm actually going to go ahead and start the shading. What I'm going to do is start with the dark and work my way up to the light. And that's just straight black ink. I'm not diluting it with anything, not breaking it down yet, because I'm doing all this to heavy shadow areas that are just straight black. I'm going to go ahead and start with the overlapping areas, like the deepest parts that are furthest in the background, and then work my way up to the pieces that are in the foreground. So I'm going to start with this secondary wing right there, which is behind the shell, and this larger wing right there, and then also work my way through the gears and whatnot. But again, I'm going to work my way from there out to the edge. Now when you're doing this, you see a little bit of where that letter is at. I'm just going to go ahead and do it solid black right up to there and then fade it out once I get past there. I'm going to do something similar to that when it gets up here along this leading edge of the wing. Now this, I'm just using a standard 9 mag. It's not rounded or anything special, but it's actually very easy to cut into these small, tiny little areas I'm working with. Because as you can see, there's a lot of little angles and nooks, especially working on these gears and the little framework and all the little detail spots in there. You're gonna have to utilize the angle at the corner to get in all those little spots, and it's much easier using a standard 9 mag to do that. Now again, keep in mind that this is going to be broken down 2 more times. I'm going to use a medium dilution with this particular type of ink, and I'm going to do 1 more after that with a mixture that's the majority water with just a couple drops of the black ink in it. So that doesn't give you room to do a rough job, but basically it doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly smooth because you're going to blend it out 2 more times anyway. So basically what you're doing now is just blocking out the heavy shadow areas. Now me personally, what I do is all the detail and the actual illustration, the drawing part of it, and I kind of just make it up on the skin as I go along. But that's because it is my artwork that I'm using. When you're starting out, you're definitely going to want to use reference and try to stick as close to the picture as possible until you get comfortable enough working with it, until you get to the point where you're actually moving on to your own artwork. In that case, you know, I still use reference sometimes, even though it's my own drawing, but the majority of the time I don't, because I actually spend more time tattooing than I do drawing, so I'm actually more comfortable working on skin than I am paper. Now you see actually when I'm doing this, when I'm tattooing, I'm pushing it into the skin and then pulling it back towards me in that motion. Now what that's doing is it's causing friction when it hits the skin. It's pushing the needle back into the tube, and this rubber bands are holding it in place. So you kind of don't want to do that in the opposite. If you hit it on the backstroke, it's going to pull it away from the tube, and the ink's not going to flow out quite as well. So you want to kind of work into the skin, down and in. And when it's sped up, it should look something like that. So I'm not really making circles, more or less kind of eccentric ovals at an angle. The brand of ink that I normally use for something like this would be Pelikan, but I actually switched over to Talons. You get a pretty similar result from both types of ink, although they are slightly different in that one has a slightly cooler kind of look to it, which is akin to maybe like a bluish just a very hint of like a bluish kind of tinge to it, whereas a warmer color would have a kind of brown. But again, these are just very, very subtle hints of a difference in the color in them. Now, being that this cover up, the letters actually extend well up into the wing, all the way through to where these gears are. I'm going to go ahead and continue like the black shading all the way up through there. And even though it's not necessarily going to be matched, you know, the other side isn't done the exact same way. The letters don't fall into place in the same spots because it's not the same ward on the other side. Even though that is different, you do want the tattoo to match on both sides because it is symmetrical, so you want to go ahead and do the shading the same way. Again, even though it's not necessarily going to be covering up the same spot and it might not need it, you kind of have to put it in there anyway, just because, again, you want it to be symmetrical and even if it calls for it. You know, if the design itself isn't meant to be balanced on both sides, then you can kind of just shade it accordingly to what you're working with. But with something like this, it's definitely important to keep it as well matched on both sides as possible. Now you kind of see him jumping around a little bit, like working from different angles at it, and that's because as I'm working through it, the angle is changing, the line I'm working with, and it's just kind of easier to hit it from certain spots. And the idea is to get your hand in the machine in the most comfortable position to where it's going in the smoothest and the most comfortable for you from that particular angle. And you know, in a lot of instances, it works good one way in one little spot, and as soon as you move along, you have to switch and change it up. So again, don't be afraid to play with the positions as you're going along.